Welcome, friend. If you found your way to this corner of the internet, I imagine you've carried a few heavy dinners home from your parents' expectations, too. Around here, we don't shout to be heard. We tell the kind of story that finds you later, on a quiet train on a sleepless night, and sits beside you like an old neighbor who knows your name. If that sounds like company you could use, consider staying a while. Tap subscribe, drop a note about where you're watching from, and let this be our weekly table where hard family truths are spoken softly and still land true. Tonight's story is titled, "My parents demanded I sell my house to my sister or be disowned, but her CEO already." My name is Sarah Irving, and last month I learned that the cleanest way to answer a lifetime of manipulation is not a raised voice but a crisp signature, the kind that leaves no smudges and even fewer misunderstandings. It began, as these things tend to, with a phone call framed as concern. "Sweetheart," my mother said, laying sugar on the word until it stuck, "we're worried the house will be too much for you." I could hear the clink of ice in a glass, the low drone of the afternoon news. My father, somewhere just off speaker, cleared his throat the way he did when a verdict had already been decided. "Your sister needs a place to entertain clients," he added, offering the phrase like a prayer. Melissa, the golden child, the sun around which the family had built its calendar. If you grew up in a house like mine, you know the script. There is the child who is independent, a compliment that ages into an alibi, and there is the child who is fragile, which is a velvet rope across every door. I learned early that "Sarah doesn't need what Melissa needs" was a talisman my parents carried to ward off equity. At 7 a.m., I took the bus to public school, while Melissa was driven to Preston Academy in a car that smelled of leather and assurances. At 14, my debate team fee of $200 was not in the budget. The same week Melissa received a $3,000 laptop for creative pursuits. In our house, the ledger was neat and the math was brutal. Only my grandmother, Alina, kept a different book. She never argued with my parents. She would not have won, but she curated a world where I counted. Sometimes resistance is not a banner, but a chair pulled out for you at her kitchen table. She would come into my room on those evenings when the walls held the day's disappointments too close, and she would sit, perfume of lavender building a small, defensible air around us. "How's my brilliant girl?" she'd ask, and it's astonishing how two words, brilliant girl, can sew a torn edge together, however briefly. Once, when I was 16, after they missed my National Honor Society induction for Melissa's recital, I asked the question that children eventually ask when they tire of being reasonable. "Why do they love her more?" I asked into her shoulder. She cupped the back of my head and spoke, not like a judge but like a cartographer. "They don't love her more," she said. "They love themselves more. Melissa reflects what they wish they were: effortless, adored, applauded. You reflect who they are: workmanlike, unadorned, stubborn in the best way. And that terrifies them. It's possible a life can be built on one sentence if you return to it often enough." Years later, when she died, the house on Maple Street, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a porch that wrapped like an embrace, became mine. I found out in an office where grief wears business casual. The attorney's glasses reflected the neat lines of the will as she read, and suddenly my name was tethered to a place where the floorboards had memorized our Christmases, where the oven kept the secret of Alina's apple pie, where the garden bloomed on time no matter who forgot whom. Outside, the Caltrain sighed its way past, and somewhere a leaf blower persisted with the kind of optimism that borders on rude. Inside, a signature found its mark. I wish I could say my first thought was gratitude, but honesty is the tax you pay when you tell a story like this. My first thought was relief, the kind that loosens the muscles behind your eyes. A studio apartment in Redwood City had taught me more than I ever wanted to know about rent hikes and roommates who confuse due date with suggestion. Maple Street was 5 minutes from my job, 2 miles from the tech campus where I'd just accepted a senior accounting role, and 10 paces from a life that might finally include quiet. I stood in the kitchen and put my palm on the cool countertop as if laying claim to a heartbeat. Of course, the thing about a gift in a family like mine is that it's promptly renamed a resource. Within a week, the messages arrived, uniform as marching orders. Family means sharing, Sarah. Don't be selfish. Your sister is starting a new life. She needs this more than you. When reasonable pressure failed, they tried holy ground. Grandma would be disappointed in your greed. I laughed quietly at night, alone, at the thought of a leaner who once told me my parents would sell my shadow if Melissa needed shade, suddenly consulting on my moral finances from beyond. Then came the conference room version of love. My father scheduled a family meeting at the attorney's office. They brought a realtor in a red blazer and the choreography of impatience. You can tell a lot about someone by how they shuffle papers that haven't been signed. "We've got cash offers," the realtor announced, as if cash possessed a sacramental quality that made all other considerations vulgar. My mother folded her hands in a steeple and spoke softly enough to sound merciful. "Sign today," she said, "and we'll all move forward. Otherwise," she left the word hovering because she knew I'd been raised to finish other people's sentences. "Otherwise," my father supplied, "you're no longer welcome in this family." There it was, the familiar weaponry, polished and oiled. Exile applied like a brand, as if the place they were threatening to ban me from had ever truly been a country where my passport worked. Maybe you think this is where I should have stood up and delivered the speech people rehearse in the shower and forget in the moment. I was tempted, but somewhere in the back row of my mind, a leaner tilted a rook across the chessboard and said, as she always did, "Never show them your next move. Just make it clean." A day later, while I was staring at my father's ultimatum like it was a riddle with only cruel answers, my phone buzzed with an unknown number and a different kind of proposition. "Sarah," the text read, "this is Marcus Chen. I heard you might be selling a property on Maple Street. Interested in talking. Marcus, my study partner from college, the man who could turn a spreadsheet into a symphony, now the CEO of the company where Melissa had recently become a marketing manager. I stared, then smiled. There is a kind of symmetry that makes you suspect God has a fondness for geometry. I asked for confidentiality, and he said of course. We met that evening. The deal we shaped was tidy without being cold. The sale would be above fair market value. The leaseback would be 10 years at a rate that honored the woman who baked pies for a neighborhood's grief. And nestled inside the language was a clause like a promise. Right of first refusal at the original purchase price. I would not lose my grandmother's house. I would learn to hold it differently. It took 3 days. Don't let anyone tell you that decisive acts are necessarily dramatic. Sometimes they are a pen uncapped, a page turned, a signature drawn with the steadiness of someone who has watched the same door close for 32 years and finally, miraculously, finds a key. When my parents assembled at the lawyer's office to perform their pageant of concern, I let them finish. When they announced they had a buyer and a timetable, I nodded. When they said today now, I stood. If we're going to talk about the house, I said, let's talk at the house. My mother smiled the way a person smiles when they think they have you on a leash. Wonderful, she said. We can all see what's at stake. And so we drove in a caravan down Maple Street, past the hydrangeas that remembered better seasons, toward the porch that had held our ordinary miracles. When we pulled up to the curb, there was a white Tesla in the driveway, sleek, quiet, a punctuation mark that doesn't need to raise its voice. My sister saw it first. "That's," she began, and then she stopped because for once life had given her a sentence she could not finish. The thing about silence is that it has weight. When we pulled up to my grandmother's house on Maple Street and that white Tesla gleamed in the driveway, the silence inside my parents' car pressed against the windows like fog. Melissa, my sister, was the first to speak, or rather to gasp. Her voice caught mid-word, a whisper clawing at her throat. That's my CEO's car." I watched the recognition ripple through her. My mother squinted as if narrowing her eyes could rewrite reality. My father's face went crimson in an instant, the same shade he wore when a football game turned against his team. He didn't yet know what the car meant, but he knew it was not good for him. I walked up the path slowly, my heels crunching on the gravel my grandmother once made me rake every autumn. That sound, to me, was a hymn of order, one of the few rituals she trusted me with. The porch rose into view, its wooden planks worn smooth from decades of family feet. It should have been sacred ground. To me, it still was. And then the door opened. Marcus Chen stepped out, not in a suit, not in the armor CEOs wear when they want the world to know they own it, but in dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, the kind of effortless choice that speaks louder than a Rolex ever could. He carried himself not with arrogance, but with a quiet certainty. His presence was enough to still the air. "Mr. Chen?" My sister's voice cracked as if she'd swallowed glass. What are you doing here?" He nodded at her the way a professor nods at a student he once graded fairly but without favor. Then his eyes found mine, and his face broke into something warmer. "Sarah, perfect timing." My father stepped forward, puffing himself up like he had in every PTA meeting, every little league dispute, certain his volume was power. "This is family business," he barked. "We don't need outsiders meddling." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Outsiders," he repeated, as though testing the word for its edges. "I don't believe that's accurate. This house is mine." For a moment, the street was silent, and even the birds seemed to pause mid-flight. Then my mother shrieked, a sound somewhere between denial and outrage. "Impossible! This house belongs to Sarah." "Belonged," my attorney, MS Mills, said calmly from behind me, stepping forward with her briefcase. She set it on the porch railing and flipped it open like a magician preparing her final reveal. Past tense. The sale was completed 3 days ago. All filings are clean, notarized, and on record with the county clerk. She handed my father a copy of the deed transfer. The paper fluttered in his hand like a bird desperate to escape. Melissa turned to me, mascara already smudging beneath her eyes. "You sold it to my boss?" Her voice trembled, her career flashing before her like photographs scattered in the wind. "Technically to his investment company," Marcus clarified, his tone professional. "But yes, all perfectly legal and at above market value." Neighbors had started to gather by now, drawn to the spectacle like moths to a porch light. Mrs. Kim from next door, the one who always gave out the best Halloween candy, had her phone out. Mr. Peterson leaned on his cane with a grin so wide it could have been a billboard. In families like mine, truth often needs an audience. "This is fraud," my father roared. "Manipulation, you took advantage of her." He jabbed a finger at Marcus, his voice loud enough to make the curtains twitch across the street. Marcus laughed, an easy, genuine laugh, the kind that says I have nothing to hide. "Mr. Irving, I paid $800,000 for this property, $20,000 above asking. If anyone was taken advantage of, it was me. But I wanted this house in this location for a specific reason." Melissa's lips parted, dread creeping in. "Why?" she whispered. Marcus's smile was polite, almost kind. "We're opening a satellite office for our marketing division. Your division, actually." Her knees buckled just enough to betray her. "Here," she croaked. "Here," Marcus confirmed. "This location is ideal, quiet, residential, close to transit. Exactly the environment we want for creative work." The color drained from Melissa's face. For years, she had strutted through life as the chosen one, cushioned by indulgence. And now, her sanctuary of favoritism had been turned inside out. She would have to clock in every day under the roof she'd tried to steal. I should have pitied her, but pity is a currency I had learned to spend more wisely. My mother lunged toward me, her voice a dagger. "You vindictive little—" But MS. Mills stepped neatly between us. "I'd be very careful, Mrs. Irving. Assault charges won't help your case." I thought of my grandmother in that moment, of the way she had whispered during chess games. "Never show your next move until it's already made." Standing there, with neighbors filming, with my parents cornered by their own hubris, I realized my move had been made. Clean. And for the first time in my life, they were the ones left without a board. If you've ever played a game of chess with someone who assumes they've already won, you'll know the peculiar silence that follows when they realize they've been cornered. That was the air on Maple Street that day. Thick, unbreathable, and laced with disbelief. My father's jaw clenched so tightly I could hear his molars grind. My mother's hands fluttered at her pearls, as though clutching them might rewind the last 5 minutes. Melissa sat on the porch step like a child whose balloon had burst, her mascara streaking into tributaries of despair. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Marcus, on the other hand, was all composure. He leaned casually against the porch railing, arms folded, surveying the crowd of neighbors who had turned our family implosion into Saturday entertainment. He had the air of a man used to leading boardrooms, not backyards, and yet he commanded this stage just the same. "Let's be clear," he said, his voice steady, pitched for everyone present to hear. "This property was legally sold, documents filed, funds transferred. There is no ambiguity here." MS. Mills laid the papers out like evidence in a trial, the deed, the purchase agreement, the wire confirmation. The sun caught the ink, and for a moment I thought of my grandmother's hands, how they once signed permission slips, how they once folded recipes into the drawer by the stove. The pen had always been her weapon of choice. My father jabbed a finger at me. "You did this to spite us." His voice trembled with something I hadn't heard in years, not power, but fear. I met his eyes. "No, I did this to protect myself, for once." That single sentence changed something in me. Saying it aloud, in front of him, in front of them all, was like pulling a splinter I had lived with for decades. The wound would take time, but it would finally heal. Melissa rose unsteadily, her hands shaking. "Mr. Chen," she stammered, "you can't mean to put our team here. It's inappropriate, unprofessional. This is my family's house." Marcus's eyes softened just slightly, but his words remained precise. "It was your family's house. Now it is company property. Your team will report here beginning Monday. I expect punctuality." Her mouth opened, then closed. No script, no tears, no performance could undo a contract stamped with ink. Around us, the neighbors buzzed. Phones tilted at angles to catch every word. Mrs. Kim muttered something in Korean that made her daughter laugh. Mr. Peterson leaned forward on his cane, grinning like he'd waited decades for this. In some neighborhoods, justice is the police. In ours, it was gossip armed with video. My mother finally found her voice. "This is harassment," she cried, pointing at me as though I'd conjured the entire ordeal. "You're destroying your sister's life. For what? To live in a drafty old house your grandmother should have left to both of you." I inhaled deeply, steadying myself with the scent of the roses Grandma had planted by the porch. "For stability," I said. "For peace. For the chance to stop being a ghost in my own family." My father scoffed. "You were always independent, Sarah. You never needed us." The words burned, not because they were new, but because they were so familiar. Independence, they called it. Neglect, I knew it to be. A child who cooks her own dinner isn't independent, she's hungry. A girl who pays her way through college isn't resilient, she's abandoned. I wanted to shout those truths into the crowd to peel the facade from their carefully constructed myth. But a leaner's voice echoed in me again, "Never show them your next move. Just make it clean." So I smiled instead. "Family is supposed to choose you," I said softly, "not demand you disappear for someone else's convenience." It was then that Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then looked back at us. "The movers are here," he announced. And right on cue, a truck rounded the corner, pulling to a stop in front of the house. Two men jumped out, swinging open the back to reveal sleek desks, rolling chairs, whiteboards, the bones of an office. The sound of furniture thudding against the porch steps was, in its own way, a verdict. Melissa let out a strangled sound, half sob, half protest. "No, no, no, no." But the movers didn't hear her. Or perhaps they did, and like me, had long ago learned to stop indulging tears that were nothing more than tools. I looked out at the street, at the cluster of neighbors, at the garden that had been both my hiding place and my refuge. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one on display. I was the one in control. The game had shifted, and my family, so used to being the players, had finally realized they were the pawns. The movers worked with a rhythm that was almost musical, the thud of desks against porch steps echoing like drumbeats of inevitability. Each piece of furniture crossing the threshold was a reminder that the house, once the stage of Christmas mornings and birthday absences, had entered a new act. My grandmother's rooms were being redefined, not erased. And for once, I was the one holding the script. Melissa stood frozen on the walkway, her fingers trembling as though she could snap them and make it all vanish. "You can't make me work here," she whispered, her voice cracking, a child's protest leaking through the facade of a professional. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You'll be expected here Monday at 9 a.m. sharp. Of course, if you'd prefer a transfer, HR will be happy to discuss your options. But as you know, transfers often come with adjustments." The way he let that last word linger was surgical, slicing away any illusion of power she thought she still had. My mother turned to me, eyes blazing. "Do you see what you've done? You've humiliated your sister. You've shamed this family." I met her fury with calm. "No, Mom, I've exposed the shame you tried to bury. There's a difference." A murmur rippled through the neighbors gathered at the curb. "Mrs." Kim whispered to her daughter, who nodded solemnly. "Mr." Peterson chuckled openly, shaking his head. This was no longer a private quarrel. It had become a neighborhood trial, and every pair of eyes was a jury. "MS." Mills adjusted her glasses, pulling documents from her briefcase with the kind of precision only decades of lawyering could teach. "For the record," she said, "this sale is binding. Contesting it would require evidence of undue influence at the time the will was signed. But Mrs. Aliner was evaluated by 2 physicians, both of whom confirmed full mental capacity. Every I is dotted, every T crossed." She spread the papers across the hood of her Lexus like a general displaying war maps. My father's face flushed an even deeper red. "You've turned her against us," he snapped at Mills. Her voice was steady, untouched by his rage. "No, Aliner saw you clearly. She told me directly, they will try to take this from Sarah. Do not let them." The words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, the noise around me blurred, and I saw her again, her hands planting bulbs in the garden, her laugh ringing through the kitchen, her whispered reassurance during those long chess games. She had known, she had prepared. My mother sputtered, "That's a lie." "But Mrs." Kim's voice cut through the air, strong and sharp. "It's the truth. Aliner told us too. We saw how you treated Sarah. You paraded Melissa like a trophy and left Sarah in the shadows." The crowd shifted, emboldened by the fracture. Other neighbors nodded, some muttering in agreement. For years, the Irving family had presented itself as flawless, enviable. But truth, once unwrapped, has a way of refusing to go back in the box. Melissa's eyes darted between the neighbors and her boss, her world collapsing in real time. "This isn't fair," she cried, her voice cracking under the weight of reality. "I worked so hard for this promotion. I deserve." "You deserve what you've earned," Marcus interrupted, his tone still professional, but steel threaded through it. "Nothing more, nothing less." Her mouth snapped shut, the fight draining from her shoulders. For the first time, she looked small, not because of me, but because the scaffolding of favoritism had been stripped away, leaving only her own effort to stand on. I stepped closer to the porch, the roses brushing against my arm. "All my life, you've told me family comes first," I said, my voice steady but carrying. "But what you really meant was Melissa comes first. Every birthday forgotten, every graduation ignored, every achievement dismissed, it all built to this. And now, finally, I'm not asking. I'm not begging. I'm not waiting. I'm deciding." My father pointed at me, his voice low and menacing. "You're out of this family, Sarah. Do you hear me? Out." For the first time, I didn't flinch. I smiled. "Promise." The neighbors gasped, some stifling laughter, others whispering their approval. In that moment, I realized exile had no power over me anymore. You cannot be cast out of a place you never truly belonged. Behind me, the movers carried in the final desk. The house had shifted, and so had I. And on that porch, with the past unraveling and the future settling into place, I felt something I had never once felt in their presence. Free. The convoy to Maple Street had felt like a funeral procession, but the real burial happened after the last desk crossed the threshold. Something in my parents' faces cracked that no veneer of respectability could cover again. My father, always the commander, suddenly looked like a man without an army. My mother clutched Melissa's arm as though sheer grip might keep her standing. And Melissa, she looked at the bay window, Grandma's reading nook, now designated as her new creative space, with the horror of a child seeing her bedroom stripped bare. I wanted to feel pity, but pity is a luxury reserved for those who have given you something to lose. My family had given me only lessons in scarcity. The neighbors lingered like spectators after a parade, unwilling to leave until the last banner dropped. Phones still pointed, whispers traded like currency. "Mrs. Chen from 3 doors down called out over the hedge, her voice gentle but clear. "Eleanor would be proud of you, Sarah." That silenced the crowd more effectively than any gavel. My mother spun toward her, face flushed. "Proud of this betrayal?" "No, Mrs." Chen replied, folding her arms. Proud of her granddaughter finally standing up for herself. "Eleanor told us what you were like. We all knew. It's one thing to face your child's defiance. It's another to realize your neighbors have been witnesses all along." My parents' myth of the perfect family collapsed under the weight of communal memory. Marcus, ever the tactician, chose that moment to step forward. "Let me be perfectly clear," he said, his voice carrying across the lawn. "This house is now company property. Sarah resides here under a legal lease. Any harassment or trespassing will be met with legal consequences. Monday morning, our marketing team begins work here. Professional boundaries will be respected." Melissa swayed where she stood, mascara streaks drying into cracked rivers. "You can't do this," she whispered. "It's already done," Marcus replied. His tone wasn't cruel, it was final, like a judge reading a sentence that had been inevitable all along. My father muttered something about lawyers, about contests, about fraud. But Mills cut him short. "You have no case. The statute of limitations, the evaluations, the clean will, all of it ensures Sarah's rights. Eleanor anticipated this. She left no openings for your arguments." My mother's lip trembled. She turned her against us. "No," I said quietly so the crowd had to lean in. She turned me toward myself. The words surprised even me, but the moment they left my mouth, I knew they were true. The movers closed the truck, and the sound echoed like a door slamming shut on decades of silence. A police cruiser rolled slowly down the street, lights off but presence undeniable. Marcus had called earlier, and now the blue and white reminder of law's authority idled at the curb. My father stiffened, but he didn't dare escalate. My mother hissed under her breath, venom without volume. Melissa stayed seated, staring at the house as though staring might will it back into her possession. I looked at them all, then at the garden where Grandma once planted tulips with my small hands guiding hers. I thought of her words, "They'll never see your strength until you stop hiding it." And for the first time in my life, I wasn't hiding anything. The neighbors began to disperse, one by one, satisfied that the show had given them enough to talk about for weeks. Phones slid into pockets, nods were exchanged, murmurs of "good for her" rippled through the crowd. Justice, in that moment, was not a verdict in a courtroom but a consensus on a sidewalk. As the sun began to dip behind the tech corridor skyline, I realized something profound. My family hadn't lost control of me that day. They had never truly owned it. What they lost was the illusion that I could be coerced forever. My father growled one last warning. "This isn't over." But it was. And standing there with roses brushing against my arm and the scent of lavender still ghosting from memory, I whispered to myself words no one else could hear. "I am finally home." Monday morning arrived like the opening bell of a match everyone in the neighborhood had been waiting to see. I woke early, brewed coffee in Grandma's chipped blue mug, and stood by the kitchen window as the sun slid over Maple Street. The garden glistened with dew, the roses opening like they were stretching after a long night's sleep. For the first time in years, I felt the strange, steady pulse of belonging. At 8:45 sharp, cars began to appear. Sedans, SUVs, and sleek hybrids lined the curb like chess pieces taking their places. By 8:58, Melissa's car rolled into view. She didn't get out right away. Instead, she sat behind the wheel, her fingers clutching the steering wheel, her forehead pressed against it as if bargaining with a silent god. At 9:03, she finally emerged, adjusting her blazer, plastering on the brittle smile she had perfected for years. I waved from the upstairs window. Our eyes met, and for the briefest flicker, I saw something raw, shame, maybe, or recognition. Then she turned away and walked briskly toward the porch, heels clicking on the wooden steps Grandma once rocked me to sleep on. Downstairs, the house hummed with a new rhythm. Desks arranged in neat rows, laptops opening, whiteboards already filling with color-coded brainstorming. The sound of keyboards clicking replaced the echo of holiday silences. Marcus had transformed the first floor into a living, breathing satellite office. My grandmother's reading nook, the one with the bay window, now belonged to Melissa's department. Every day she would sit in the place Grandma once kept her teacups and spy novels, and every day she would have to see me walking through the hall, living upstairs in the apartment they tried to strip away. By mid-morning, I heard Jennifer Wu, Melissa's department head, leading a meeting. Her voice carried through the old vents like an announcement system. "We want this space to encourage creative collaboration," Jennifer said. "Fresh ideas, new energy." Melissa chimed in, her voice brittle with strain. "Yes, absolutely. I think this environment will inspire." But even through the vent, I could hear the cracks. Inspiration doesn't come easy when every wall reminds you of your own failed coup. At noon, there was a knock at my door. Melissa stood there, no longer polished but frayed, strands of hair falling loose, eyes rimmed red. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice so small I almost didn't recognize it. I stepped aside, letting her in. She scanned the apartment upstairs, the books on my shelves, the plants I'd nursed back to life, the framed photo of Grandma and me at my graduation. All of it was mine, undeniably, unapologetically. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "What isn't?" I asked. "You living here, me working here, it's psychological torture." I looked at her for a long moment. "No, Melissa, it's consequences. You tried to take what wasn't yours. You tried to erase me from my own inheritance. Now you work in it. That's not torture. That's balance." Tears welled, but this time they didn't spill. She knew they wouldn't work here, not anymore. She left without another word, heels clicking down the stairs, softer now, less certain. That evening, Marcus called to check in. "How was day one?" he asked. "Educational," I replied, sipping my coffee. "For everyone. No regrets." I looked around Grandma's kitchen, the china still in the cabinets, her apron still on its hook. The air carried the faintest memory of cinnamon, as though the walls themselves remembered every pie she'd ever baked. "Not a single one," I said. And when I hung up, I realized this wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. The house, the garden, the silence, it was mine now. And so was the life they'd always tried to deny me. 3 months later, the house had settled into its strange new identity, half sanctuary, half satellite office. By day, the downstairs buzzed with the cadence of corporate ambition, phones ringing, whiteboard markers squeaking, the low hum of printers. By night upstairs, my apartment held a quieter music, the rustle of book pages, the whisper of the wind through Grandma's curtains, the soft clink of teacups as I sipped alone. Melissa arrived each morning at exactly 9:00 a.m. Never earlier, never later. She would park in the designated employee section Marcus had carved out and walk past my door with robotic precision, eyes fixed forward, lips pressed thin. We existed like neighbors in parallel universes, her tethered to the downstairs she once tried to seize, me rooted firmly in the upstairs she could never touch. Without my parents cushioning every fall, Melissa began to wobble. Her ideas in meetings, once inflated by flattery, now fell flat under scrutiny. Her charm, so effective at dinner tables and family gatherings, carried little weight with Jennifer Wu, who valued deliverables over dramatics. I overheard through the vents the day Jennifer put her on a performance improvement plan. "Melissa, you're capable," Jennifer said carefully, "but we need more than surface polish. We need substance." I imagined my sister nodding, promising to do better, but I also knew she had never been trained for this, trained to survive without applause. Meanwhile, my own life blossomed in ways I hadn't expected. Freed from the chokehold of rent and instability, I began consulting again in the evenings, work that challenged me, work that reminded me of my worth. My savings account grew steadier than it had ever been, each deposit a small rebellion against the years I was told I didn't need as much. One night, while reorganizing Grandma's closet, I stumbled upon a box I hadn't noticed before. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to me but never sent. I sat cross-legged on the floor, heart pounding. As I opened one, "My dearest Sarah," it began in her looping handwriting. "I watch them dim your light and it breaks my heart. But I see the fire in you they try to extinguish. It isn't gone, just hidden. One day you'll have the chance to let it burn bright. When that day comes, don't hesitate. Don't feel guilty. Take what is yours and build the life you deserve. All my love, Grandma." The letter was dated 3 years before she died. She had known. She had planned for this moment long before I had the courage to face it. Tears blurred the ink, but for once they weren't from pain. They were from recognition. Recognition that I wasn't alone, hadn't ever been alone. I had been carrying her voice with me all along, tucked between my ribs like a hidden compass. Meanwhile, the family fractured further. Thanksgiving passed without a call. Christmas came and went without an invitation. My mother sent one text, "You're missing Melissa's engagement party," as though absence were a crime rather than a choice. I deleted it without reply. In contrast, the neighbors became my community. Mrs. Kim often brought over dumplings, telling me stories of how Alina had quietly slipped casseroles to her when money was tight. Mr. Peterson shared how my grandmother once sat with him through a lonely Christmas after his wife passed. I was learning a truth Alina had whispered often. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up when showing up costs them something. The more I embraced that truth, the lighter I felt. For the first time, I wasn't clawing for a seat at a table that had never welcomed me. I was building my own. Melissa, meanwhile, was shrinking into herself. Without the safety net, her world had edges she couldn't soften. And though I didn't rejoice in her struggles, I couldn't save her either. She had chosen her stage, and now the spotlight revealed more than charm could conceal. I closed Grandma's letter box, held it to my chest, and whispered into the quiet apartment, "I'm doing it, Grandma. I'm finally doing it." And the silence, warm and full, felt like her answer. 6 months after the sale, life had rearranged itself like furniture in a familiar room. Same walls, new purpose. The downstairs no longer looked like my grandmother's home, not in the traditional sense. It pulsed with corporate life. Sleek desks, ergonomic chairs, whiteboards streaked with diagrams. Yet upstairs, where I lived, time seemed to stand still. Her china still lined the cabinets. Her apron still hung by the stove. Her lavender sachet still perfumed the dresser drawers. The house had become 2 stories of parallel truths, one dedicated to business, the other to memory. Melissa continued her routine, arriving daily at 9:00 sharp, though the sparkle she once carried was gone. I saw it in the way she walked, shoulders hunched, stride clipped, no longer the golden child who floated on applause. More often, she dragged herself past my door without even a glance. And in the evenings, when the office lights dimmed and the hum of productivity faded, I sometimes heard her muffled voice through the vents. Complaints to coworkers, desperate calls to friends, fragments of resentment. "She got everything," I heard her say once, her voice shaking. A coworker had replied gently, "Didn't she inherit it? Isn't it hers?" Melissa's silence afterward was heavier than any argument. One crisp autumn evening, Marcus stopped by for a property walkthrough. He found me in the garden, kneeling in the soil where Grandma had once guided my small hands to plant tulip bulbs. The roses bloomed stubbornly, defiantly, despite the shifting seasons. "Your parents called again," Marcus said, adjusting his tie. "Offered double what I paid. I told them the property isn't for sale." I smiled faintly, brushing dirt from my palms. "Sounds about right. They've always tried to buy their way back into control." He studied me for a moment. "Do you ever regret how it played out?" I shook my head. Regret implies I had another choice. I didn't. It was either let them erase me again or finally draw the line. Later that night, I found another letter in the box Grandma had left behind. This one was dated even earlier. "Sarah," it read, "you may wonder why I chose you. It isn't favoritism. It's recognition. You've carried burdens that weren't yours, worked twice as hard for half as much. The house is not just a gift, it's protection. It will shield you when the family storms come, and they will come. Stand firm. The walls are stronger than you think, and so are you." I clutched that letter like a lifeline because the storms did come. On a gray Tuesday, my phone rang. It was my mother. She didn't bother with greetings. "Your sister lost her job today," she said flatly, as if announcing a weather report. "It's your fault." I closed my eyes, steadying myself. "Her performance was her responsibility, Mom, not mine. You forced her to work in that house," she snapped. "You ruined her career. Are you happy now?" I looked around at the familiar walls, at the garden outside the window, at the letters that had become my scripture. "I'm not happy she failed," I said honestly, "but I won't carry the blame for choices she made." She hung up without another word, An hour later, Marcus called. I thought you should hear it from me. Melissa's termination was performance-based, nothing to do with the property arrangement. Jennifer made the decision after months of missed targets. I know, I said quietly. I heard enough through the vents. Do you want to help her? He asked gently. I thought about it, I really did. Then I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. She never asked, she demanded, she manipulated, she cried, but she never once just asked. After the call, I sat in the garden until the sky turned violet, the last leaves crunching beneath my chair. I whispered to the soil, to the blooms, to the memory of a leaner. I've kept the promise. I've protected what you gave me. I've built the boundaries you knew I'd need. And in that twilight silence, as the house settled into its bones, I felt something deeper than victory. I felt peace. By the time autumn gave way to winter, the story of the Irving family had become neighborhood folklore. People on Maple Street still whispered about the showdown. It was about the day the golden child's crown cracked, and the overlooked daughter planted her flag. Some even admitted, quietly, conspiratorially, that they had always suspected something was wrong with the way my parents treated me. It was almost comical. For decades, I'd been invisible, and now, thanks to one house and a contract, I had become a symbol. Meanwhile, my parents were unraveling in their own way. They listed their home, announcing loudly that they were downsizing, though everyone in town knew it was running from whispers, from side-eyes at the grocery store, from the humiliation of having their secrets exposed not by tabloids but by their own neighbors' iPhones. A fresh start in Arizona, my mother said in a Christmas card she mailed to relatives but not to me. I didn't miss them. Melissa, on the other hand, I did think about more than I wanted to admit. After her termination, she stopped coming to the house entirely. No more heels clicking against the porch, no more forced smiles through the bay window. Her absence was louder than her presence had ever been. Occasionally, I heard about her through the grapevine, how she'd left her luxury apartment, how the designer clothes were pawned off, how she drove an older car now, without the gloss of parental subsidies. I wanted to feel triumph, but what I felt instead was clarity. For the first time, Melissa was tasting what I had swallowed all my life, scarcity. The difference was I had built muscle around it. She was only now learning how to walk without a net. The house itself seemed to breathe easier once the company relocated to a larger office. Marcus had only needed the Maple Street property for 6 months to make his point, both to my family and perhaps to Melissa herself. When the desks were moved out and the whiteboards erased for the last time, the downstairs exhaled, returning to the quiet Alina had always cherished. The garden, too, bloomed brighter, as though relieved from carrying the weight of corporate chatter. One afternoon, while cleaning out a drawer in the study, I found yet another of Alina's letters. Family isn't who shares your name, she had written. It's who stands beside you when standing beside you costs them something. Those words cut deep. My parents had never stood beside me when it cost them comfort. Melissa never had either, but Marcus had. Jennifer Wu had in her own way, even Mrs. Kim and Mr. Peterson had, when they risked neighborly politeness to speak truth on my lawn. Slowly, I was building a new definition of family, one my grandmother had always believed I would. Christmas morning came, and I made coffee in Grandma's mug. Outside, the neighborhood was hushed with frost. For the first time, I didn't ache at the absence of a phone call, an invitation, or a holiday table where my chair was always an afterthought. Instead, I lit a candle in the kitchen, let the scent of cinnamon fill the air, and felt whole. That evening, Marcus stopped by. He looked around the quiet rooms, now empty of desks, and smiled. "Feels like it belongs to you again," he said. "It always did," I replied. "They just never wanted to see it." He nodded, thoughtful. "Your grandmother was right. The best revenge isn't loud, it's lasting." I looked at the garden where new bulbs waited beneath the soil for spring. "And the best kind of love," I added, is the kind you give yourself when no one else will. For once, Marcus didn't have a reply. He just smiled like someone watching a player finish the game with the quietest, cleanest checkmate. Spring arrived quietly, the way change often does. First in the soft, green tips of the garden, then in the way the air carried warmth instead of bite. I spent mornings with dirt under my fingernails, coaxing life from the same soil Alina once tended. Tulips pushed through with stubborn color, roses stretched upward as if remembering her hands. The house, relieved of its brief corporate identity, had returned to something truer, a sanctuary, not a showroom. One afternoon, while kneeling by the rosebush, Mrs. Kim walked over with a basket of mandu. She placed it in my hands, her eyes kind. "Your grandmother used to bring me soup when my husband was sick," she said softly. "She told me once, I don't know if Sarah will ever see herself the way I do, but she will someday." I swallowed hard, the scent of steamed dumplings wrapping me in unexpected tenderness. She believed in me more than anyone, I admitted. Mrs. Kim smiled. "Now you must believe in yourself." Inside, upstairs, I had begun turning Grandma's spare room into my own office. A true one this time, not a borrowed desk or a corner of a shared apartment. A space where I could build my consulting work, draft financial plans, and help others find the stability I had clawed toward for years. With the security of my lease and savings, I was finally designing a life that wasn't built on scraps. My parents tried once more to breach the walls. A letter arrived, handwritten by my mother. The words were sugar-dipped, but the aftertaste was bitter. "We're willing to forgive if you acknowledge what you did to your sister. Family is about unity, Sarah, not selfishness. We're starting fresh in Arizona. You should join us." I folded the letter neatly and slid it into the same box that held Alina's notes. Not because it mattered, but because it reminded me of the contrast. My grandmother's words built, my mother's words bound. I chose building. Melissa, meanwhile, had all but vanished. Occasionally, whispers floated back. She'd taken a job far below her old title. She was renting a modest place with a roommate. She'd stopped posting curated snapshots of champagne brunches. I didn't revel in her decline, but I also didn't chase after her. For once, her path was her own. One night, sitting by the porch with a cup of tea, I thought of Alina again. Her laughter, her lavender perfume, her steady hand guiding mine over a chessboard. She had always played the long game. And now, sitting in the house she had entrusted to me, I finally understood her lesson. Strength isn't loud, it isn't cruel. It's steady, it's contractual. It's knowing when to sign your name and when to walk away. The street was quiet, save for the chirping of crickets. A light flickered in Mrs. Kim's window, and somewhere down the block a dog barked once, then fell silent. I looked up at the stars, bright, indifferent, eternal, and whispered, "I did it, Grandma. I kept what was mine." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just the end of a battle. It was the start of a life where I was no longer surviving my family's choices, but living my own. By summer, the rhythms of Maple Street felt different. The whispers had quieted, replaced by nods of respect from neighbors who once only knew me as the other Irving daughter. When I passed Mrs. Kim's house, she would wave with both hands, as if sending her approval through the air. Mr. Peterson often called out from his porch. Your grandmother would be smiling ear to ear. These small acknowledgments carried more weight than the empty accolades my parents once reserved for Melissa's every recital. The house itself seemed to hum with peace. The walls no longer echoed with the tension of arguments or the sterile hum of corporate machinery. Instead, there was the steady tick of the old clock in the hall, the rustle of leaves outside the bay window, and the soft, grounding sound of my own breath as I worked in the office I had built upstairs. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing stability. It was rooted beneath me. Financially, I was thriving. Between my senior accountant position and the consulting clients I'd added, My savings had grown faster than I'd ever imagined possible. I had started investing, not just money, but hope, in a future I could design on my terms. Each deposit, each carefully planned budget, felt like a small rebellion against the scarcity my parents had forced on me. Melissa, meanwhile, stumbled. Word drifted back through LinkedIn updates and whispered conversations. She had been demoted, then dismissed. Her luxury apartment was gone, the designer car replaced by something used, practical. I should have felt vindicated, but what I felt was a quiet sorrow. Not because I wanted her old life restored, but because I understood the crash that comes when the scaffolding falls away. Still, I couldn't rescue her. That was the hardest truth to accept. For years, I had imagined that one day she would see me clearly, that maybe we could rebuild as sisters. But when she had the chance, she chose entitlement over connection. Now, the silence between us was not a punishment, it was a boundary. One evening, sorting through the last of Grandma's papers, I found yet another letter. This one was shorter than the others, but sharper, like a scalpel. Sarah, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so steady that no storm can knock it down. One day, when they see you unshaken, that will be enough. I sat with those words for a long time, the letter trembling slightly in my hands, and I realized she had given me more than a house. She had given me permission. Permission to stop proving, stop begging, stop explaining. Permission to simply live. That weekend, I invited the neighbors over for tea in the garden. Kim brought pastries, Mr. Peterson arrived with lemonade, and even the Chen family joined, their laughter carrying across the lawn. We sat among Alina's roses, petals unfurling in the warm air, and shared stories about her kindness, her wit, her quiet wisdom. For the first time, I felt not like the outsider peering through glass at someone else's family, but like a part of something real. As the evening settled, I looked around at the faces glowing in the lamplight. Family wasn't who disowned you with ultimatums. Family was who showed up with dumplings and lemonade. Family was who defended you in a crowd, who remembered your worth when others denied it. And in that garden, under the fading glow of sunset, I finally felt whole. When the first chill of autumn returned, the roses in the garden were still blooming, stubborn against the season's turn. I often thought of them as Alina's final lesson. Resilience isn't about defying the cold, it's about blooming anyway. Each morning I walked through the dew-soaked grass with my coffee, breathing in the sharp scent of soil and remembering that this house, this life, was no longer something I was fighting to keep. It was mine. News reached me in fragments. My parents had sold their house and moved to Arizona, where no one knew their story. They framed it as a fresh start, though everyone who'd watched the spectacle on Maple Street knew better. It was retreat, not renewal. Melissa's career had unraveled quietly. After her dismissal, she tried freelancing, then odd marketing jobs, but without the endless cushioning of applause and subsidies, her footing was shaky. I didn't rejoice, but I didn't grieve either. Her path was hers now, as mine was mine. What surprised me most was not what I lost, but what I gained. The neighbors who once waved politely now lingered for conversation. Kim stopped by with tea nearly every week. Mr. Peterson, cane in hand, would sit in the garden and tell stories of Alina, some I had never heard, stories that painted her as even more luminous than I remembered. The community I had been denied within my bloodline was growing around me, root by root, branch by branch. One evening, Marcus returned for dinner. We sat on the porch as the sky deepened, the same porch where months earlier he had stood as the shock of my family's undoing rippled through the crowd. "Do you realize what you've done?" he asked, sipping from his glass. I smiled faintly. "Survived?" "More than that," he said. "You broke the cycle, you set the terms." His words sank into me. I thought of Alina's letters, the ink still crisp, her voice still alive in every line. The best revenge isn't emotional, It's contractual. She had been right, of course, but she had also left room for something softer. Revenge may have been the frame, but peace was the painting. That night I walked through the house slowly, touching the walls, the banisters, the window frames. Each room carried memory. The kitchen where apple pies cooled, the bay window where Melissa now no longer sat, the porch where truth finally surfaced, and upstairs my own office. Papers stacked neatly, plans laid out for clients who trusted me not because of a family name, but because I had earned it. I stood by the window, the garden glowing faintly in the moonlight, and whispered what had become my truest creed. Family isn't who you're born to. It's who stands beside you when it costs them something. By that definition, I hadn't lost anything. I had gained everything. And with the roses blooming defiantly below, I knew this story, my story, was no longer about survival. It was about belonging. And that, dear friends, is where my story rests for now. A house once used as a weapon has become a home. A life once overshadowed has found its own light. If there's one truth I carry forward, it's this: strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it signs quietly on the dotted line, plants tulips in the soil, and chooses peace over approval. To each of you who stayed with me until the very last word, thank you. These stories aren't just mine. They belong to anyone who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told they didn't matter. May you find your own ground to stand on, your own walls to protect what's sacred, and your own voice to say no more. I wish you health, peace, and a family, whether by blood or by choice, that wraps around you like a garden in full bloom. Until next time, take care of yourself and hold close to those who truly see you. Thank you for listening.